Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 67 of the Coffee Squad podcast. We are joined today by special guest Nick Polidori of the Southern Pines, North Carolina Police Department. He is the current chief of police. He has been in law enforcement for almost 25 years, and he is a former U.S. Marine. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you're good, Will.
All right. Jake's still out gallivanting across the wilderness. Steve's out there in the torrential rain down in Florida doing some stuff. So it's just going to be Nick and I today. I think we're going to have some good conversation. We're going to be talking a little bit about the current state of policing, and, who better than a current chief of police in the state of North Carolina who can kind of gain some administrative insight on what's going on and some of the possible struggles or not struggles, depending on where you're at of everything that's going on in the country currently. So before we start, we usually like to talk about what we're drinking today. Are you a coffee drinker, Nick?
I am. I have one right now.
What are you drinking?
Just black coffee.
Just black coffee? Okay. So yeah. I'm a coffee snob. Jake always gives me a hard time calling me a coffee snob and stuff like that. So I have my Black Rifle coffee, Silencer Smooth. So it's a light roast with a little bit of hints of caramel and nuts and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I can't compete there, buddy. I have Kirkland brand from Costco, and I'm good with it.
I mean, it's a good brand. Yeah, it's a good. There's another, about a couple months ago, I had One Nation Coffee come on. They're out of Charleston. They're a police and veteran-owned coffee company, and you're starting to see them a lot more around the Charleston and South Carolina area. I think it's just a matter of time before they start moving up in this direction too. So
I'll have to give them a shot.
Pretty good stuff. All right, so let's.
Around here, we just put a case of it out, and everybody just goes through it.
Yep. Oh yeah. I'm at the house, so I just have I have more coffee than most places probably do, though. I probably have about 10 bags in my cupboard right now. I always take a different one every time. So I know you got a tight schedule, so we'll go ahead and hop into this interview real quick, or this conversation. I don't really want to call it an interview because we're just going to have a conversation and see where it goes.
Sure.
But I know you work closely with Ray for a long time, and our company doing the security stuff up there. So I want to talk a little bit about the security aspect of policing before we get into the current state of policing and how important it is to kind of to converge each other. And I know I had a very poor misconception of security when I was a police officer. I kind of thought all of them were the Paul Blart types. It was ignorant of me to think that. And coming into this world, I see how much more professional and training and really how broad the term security is.
Sure.
Can you kind of talk a little bit on that?
Well, I think if you have to look at it holistically, right? So take a housing authority that has armed or unarmed security at a gate or roving patrols, right? That's a one level of security, right? One piece of it. But then you have security firms or security companies that provide PI practices, large facilities, whether it be critical infrastructure facilities where there's security involved. So there's more pieces to it than just saying the guy that works at the mall or the guy that works at Proctor Silex as a security guard at the gate. So it's a bigger picture. For me, what I've learned, that's kind of like you, coming up as a patrolman for many years. If I saw a security guard somewhere, I was thinking, okay, guy, he just works for one of these security companies. But again, there's bigger pieces to it, right? So you might have a company you deal with more often that they specialize in major sporting events. So when the U.S. Open comes to town, maybe that company is providing a different level of security, whether it be on grounds or for participants or VIPs. So another way to look at it is, and you can kind of relate this back to law enforcement and military, right? What's their assets? What's the authority, right? And what's their responsibilities or mission, right? So I think if you look at it that way, then you can see exactly what a security company, what their involvement might be, or how in depth their responsibilities go, and for what client they're working with.
Yep,
but there always has to be that communication, right? There's post 9/11. You're familiar with, everybody probably listening is familiar post 9/11, where the failures identified and studied after 9/11 is you just can't have one branch of law enforcement with their information and a state level or federal level or local level is not sharing information. So I think it's important for security companies to share information as well with all levels of law enforcement. So a good example for that is locally for us in a smaller town, we have a security company that works over at one of the housing authorities. If we're not sharing information as far as who's on the property, who they're stopping, we're stopping, trespassers list, then you can't have that that continuity when you're providing services on one side or the other. So it's important to stay connected no matter what level, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really important. A friend of mine, he's a sheriff up in Wacomico County, Maryland, named Mike Lewis. He has a saying, one of the biggest downfalls in law enforcement is it's disorganized law enforcement going against organized crime, because we don't like to talk to each other. We've gotten a lot better, especially since 9/11, but there's still some agencies that don't like to share as much of others for obvious reasons. I understand that where I came from, but I think it's getting better, and I hope it's getting better. And with chiefs like you who are proactive and very what's the word? Very, very encouraging of sharing the information with each other. I think it's going to get better over the long run.
We've had a long-standing practice for about the last 8 or 9 years where we run a version of CompStat. So we bring in local agencies. We invite anybody from federal agencies that want to come, state, district attorney's office. So we bring in a large group a diverse group of law enforcement organizations to share crime information. And it's not long, it's 45 minutes to an hour. And we just go everything going on in Southern Pines, and then our local partners and state and federal partners, they can weigh in, and we throw PowerPoints up and pictures, and it's good to share that information because our crime is not singular to Southern Pines, right? So criminals don't stop at borders and state lines. So it's good to have that sharing of information going on.
Yeah, that definitely. I mean, back in the day, you used to have the saying that they can't outrun the radio. Well, if you're not sharing, they can kind of get away with stuff like that.
Absolutely. And with technology now, the radio is not even needed, right? Criminals can do plenty via the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Far quicker than you can pick up on it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's start into the whole policing. I know, I don't know how Southern Pines has been because it's, I don't want to say it's a quiet area, but it's a nice area. It's a good town, and I don't think you've had the spillover that maybe some of the larger cities and stuff has had with the peaceful protests and stuff like that.
That's correct.
But have you kind of seen a change, maybe not so much your department or surrounding departments over the last couple of years dealing with the COVID and the response to the peaceful protests, excuse me.
It's kind of the perfect storm.
Yeah.
Right. We had the beginnings of a pandemic, and then the force incident and death out in with Mr. Floyd out in Minnesota, and then all the civil unrest, excuse me. So in a year's time, things have changed for most police departments as far as policy development when it comes to use of force and certain tactics and de-escalation measures. And things have changed quite a bit, but it's actually, we're talking 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago was where it really started. This conversation started taking place, and where I kind of see either through legislation or voluntary actions is you're going to see more police departments being accredited, whether it be through CALEA like we are nationally or through a state accreditation processes that are really starting to come out. You really want to be in your training, your policy development, you really want to be in best practices and what's the guidance out there as far as, especially when it comes to high liability, force, pursuits, firearms use and training, stuff like that.
Yeah. I know I've been retired for 10 years, so obviously I'm not up to date on all the current training, but we were doing a lot of verbal judo was the term at that time, which is essentially it's de-escalation training. Right. I think they've renamed it because that verbal judo is more of an aggressive terminology. So I think it's been renamed now. So it's been around. I just think it's kind of a grown emphasis, especially within the last year or so.
Right. And everybody trains on it in the academy, at least in North Carolina. There's 2 different blocks that have de-escalation in it. Verbal judo, yes, it's still out there, whether it be that name or something different. But a lot of it just comes down to being a human being.
Yep.
Right. And not quick to jump into a force situation if you don't have to. Right. Because you can typically talk to people, like not everybody, but most you can talk to as a human being and as an adult. And that kind of brings down some of the tension in most situations anyway.
Yep, absolutely. And a lot of times I know in my experience, a lot of times they just want somebody to talk to listen
That's
to
right.
them, and so you provide that kind of outlet for them. And a lot of times if you're willing to listen and communicate with them, you can de-escalate the situation. So,
right. And so, community policing was really big in the, community-oriented policing, problem-oriented policing. There was a big push, and you remember in the 90s, and started tapering off in the 2000s. Well, now it's back up again. It's more of a focus back on community policing efforts, which is good. Most departments are too small to have a community policing division, right? So we have a community services coordinator, but it's the responsibility of everybody here to participate in community policing projects, and it can be something as simple as getting out of your car and talking to somebody in a neighborhood. And the big push has also been for several years now. We always had, you remember, you were sworn here, is you had the guardian versus the warrior mentality.
Yep.
Right. So it's trying to find that even blend of both without sacrificing your tactics or your officer safety. Right. But again, going back to your character and being a human being, that's kind of where the guardian comes in.
Absolutely.
Solving resolution instead of immediate arrest and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard, especially when you're younger, to not get that tunnel vision to go get the bad guy and kind of not get that tunnel vision. I know I learned along the way for a while there, I was very proactive, and I noticed a friend of mine, or one of my coworkers, he's like, "Hey man, you didn't have to do that." I mean, he's like, "Just think about it." And I was like, "Oh yeah, he's not everybody's bad. You kind of have to take a step back and reevaluate." And it's always good to have other officers looking out for you like that.
That's right. Yeah, good point.
And I know community policing. I know what the problem we ran into. It's a great concept, but a lot of times we didn't have the funding to do what we wanted to do.
Sure.
Because most of the time we're short officers and we're running from one call to another, so you don't necessarily have the time to do the community policing that you want. How have you found? I don't think Southern Pines has gone through a defund the police, but I know a lot of the other agencies have. Do you think that's going to affect the community policing outreach or other programs that are probably good for the community?
So if you're taking money away from an operating budget, something has to suffer, right? Something has to, whether it be response to certain types of calls, and then you have to refocus your efforts on what budget you have. Now, we're fortunate. You're right. We have had no call to defund. Our council recognizes exactly what we need and the services we provide. So it hasn't affected us. But yeah, I mean, I could see, there's articles in the paper all the time about I won't name agencies, but there's agencies out there in this state and others where they call it defunding, but they've taken money and pushed it to a different project or a different purpose. But at the end of the day, people are still calling law enforcement to respond to those same types of calls. So yes, something is suffering if there's a defund movement in an organization.
I don't know how I don't know how other departments are. I can just speak on my department. It just seemed that whenever we were getting towards the end of the year and funds were short, training was the first thing to kind of suffer, right?
Yeah.
The non-mandatory training is what suffered. And while there are steps being taken to make de-escalation training and the verbal judo type stuff mandatory, I think it is mandatory this year, if I'm not mistaken, for North Carolina.
Judo?
The de-escalation.
No, it's not. There's not a de-escalation lesson plan, but some of the mandatory in service has de-escalation elements in it.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
but I foresee the blocks in the BLET program being larger, or another block being added to it, or maybe emphasized. And I foresee other in-service training being emphasized, because that's just kind of where I see that going as far as the training for North Carolina. Because I think North Carolina actually does a pretty good job of keeping their training up to standard compared to other states.
I agree. Yeah. We don't take budget money away in training. We've always been a very high prioritizing our training. So we don't, if something has to get beat out of the budget towards the end of this fiscal year, like right now, it's going to be okay. Let's put an ammo order off until a month until the next budget year. So, we have that money, but we're blessed with a very understanding council that they know the importance of training. So we don't suffer there. I can tell you that.
Well, I know the Southern Pines has a reputation of being one of the best departments in this area. That I know a lot people that I talk to. You guys definitely have the reputation as being one of the best departments out there. So
thank you.
And I know you guys have worked hard for that too, and that's attributed a lot to you and your previous chief. So
yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I noticed around some of these other agencies, I don't know how your agency, if it's suffered or not, but the shortages. I know, Washington State Capitol Police has lost like hundreds of officers retiring early and leaving the NYPD. Asheville had something like 80 officers leave in the last year or so. Have you guys? So you have had?
Yeah. Okay. 11 or 12.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Either by retirement or just got out of the job altogether. Since July of last year, we've only had one leave here to go to another police department.
Wow.
It's just several retirements and people just got out of the job. So you were in it. If you lose somebody today, it could take 5 months to replace that person. So it's been a constant flow of promotions and new officers coming in. Luckily, we've had a lot of lateral transfers from other departments. So that helps. They already know the job. They just have to learn it at your department in an abbreviated training program.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and really, if you lose a 20-year veteran who says, you know what, I'm not going to do another 10 years, I'm done, and you hire a rookie out the street, it's going to take 5, 6, 8 years to get that rookie up to the level of the 20-year veteran. So, you're losing a lot of time and experience when you're doing that. So I know I feel for the guys and girls out there who are struggling and trying to keep the community safe and stuff like that.
Yeah. It takes in any municipality, any size city or sheriff's department, it takes 3 or 4 good years to be a police officer to really get good at this job and know it well and be comfortable. You
Absolutely.
just can't replace that experience.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, just BLET is just like basic training or anything like that. It just gives you the kind of the foundations to build on, and then you got to learn on the job. And it's definitely a trial by fire, I think, type of profession. You pick it up quick or you don't survive usually, or not survive professionally. I mean, not literally. So
yeah, and you've seen it too. Some people get into it and they make it 1.5 years or 2 years, and they throw the towel in because they realize, hey, this isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
Right. So it's not for everybody.
Absolutely. So have you found it more difficult to kind of recruit?
Recruiting is bad nationwide. Yeah. Right. I'm seeing academy classes locally and regionally that would typically have 15 to 20, and they're graduating a class of 6 or 8. Yep. So think about that impact. If you have 8 people graduating from a BLET, well, regionally, everybody's trying to get their hands on the same 8 people, especially if 5 of the 8 are rock stars, right? Yep. So it's tough. I've actually been hiring cadets. I've hired 2 cadets in the last 6 months and paid them on salary and put them through BLET. So I knew I had somebody good. Now there's downfalls to that. That leaves an open position on the road for 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. So
that's been, but it's a good way to recruit. It's a good way to recruit diversity, which is a challenge as well nationwide. So just trying to get outside the box and get the best qualified people here. So I think we're doing a pretty good job on.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a struggle. I know I've talked to a lot of my buddies that are still doing it, and they're like, if I wasn't 10 years out, 8 years out, I'd probably do something else. But that pension, that retirement, that's an incentive for police work, because down here anyways, you're not really making a lot of money. People down here don't usually do this job for the money. They do it to help protect their community, and they want to give back.
That's right. Yeah. And then at the end, if you get your 30, to your point earlier, Will, you're chasing that nice pension when you get to the end. So it is compared to other states, it's pretty good at the end.
Yeah. And going back to the BLET, I remember when I first started teaching, I don't want to age myself, but it's been about 15 years ago. We were doing, those classes were full at 30, and we'd run 3 to 4 a year, or 2 day classes and 1 night class. So that's almost at least, 30, 90 to 100 students that would start. Now you obviously don't graduate that much. Right. You're graduating 6 people, and you're lucky if you fill a full academy now. It's got to be difficult. So,
anything less than 10, you have to get a waiver from standards to run, which they're having to do a lot of times. So That's, that right there tells you the state of law enforcement, and not just in North Carolina in general, right? Trying to fill academies.
So do you see anything that, I don't know, that we can do to kind of change it, to kind of entice people to start getting in that career?
Again, remember we talked at the beginning, we're kind of hit the perfect storm, right? Between social issues, civil unrest, the COVID, pandemic. And so there's not a whole lot of incentive for people to really get to work. And that's not just law enforcement right now. If you there's a lot of open jobs out there.
There's a lot of places down here closing because they can't fill them. So
exactly. So I think that it'll pick back up, but law enforcement is going to be, it's going to be a little behind, I believe, just because there's that uneasiness of the profession right now, right? Where everybody knows the vast majority of the country supports law enforcement, right? But some don't, right? But that seems to be the loudest voice, is those who don't. So I think as a country, when we start really showing that full support for law enforcement again, like we always have for the military, then you're going to see people more comfortable getting into the job again.
I know when I came in, it was right after 9/11, and support for the police was at an all-time high. It made me feel good, and then to see how it is now, I can only imagine what a rookie would be thinking coming on the street, nowadays.
Yeah. Hey, every time I go to a new academy, I teach a little bit still at the BLET locally, and I always thank them. I thank everybody in that class for taking that plunge, right, and getting into this job, because it's not easy, especially now, and so we need more people to take that leap of faith and get back into this job.
Absolutely. So what do you kind of? I know we touched a little bit on this last question, but kind of, where do you see the future of law enforcement going as it is? Do you think it's going to end up being fewer police officers, so maybe there'll be other programs to kind of take the weight off of the police, or do you think it's going to be with the same load and they're just going to be overworked?
Well, it depends where you're talking about, right? Because there's already been some major cities around the country that said, okay, we're taking this out of your police budget and we're going to have more social workers respond to certain types of calls. Well, at the end of the day, cops are still going to end up at those calls, right? Because an emotionally disturbed person might not, it doesn't matter who goes, right? You might need that law enforcement interaction as well. So you see a lot of law enforcement agencies around the country that are putting out memorandums and notice to the public saying, hey, if you have a car break-in or something, report it. We might get there in a few hours.
Yeah.
Right. Or there's an online reporting program and somebody may or may not follow up on it for you. So we're not there, and I hope we never get to that point. I don't believe we will, but yeah, I mean, that's already happening. There's shortages, and to your point, Asheville, there was an article not long ago in the media. Hey, they're not going to certain calls anymore, and they're down 40% staffing. So something's going to suffer.
Yep. Yes. I feel bad. I wish there's something we could do to change it. But until, I think the political climate, and we don't talk politics here too much on the Coffee Squad, so we won't get into it. But yeah, I think the climate kind of changes. It's going to be difficult to.
It's coming. It'll change.
I mean, there's always ebbs and flows. So
yeah. So it'll come back. It'll be okay. We just got to get through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as far as in general, the future, right? Again, we talked earlier. I think you're going to see more police departments at some level of accreditation, whether it be state or national, like CALEA. You're going to see advancements in technology, right? I mean, look at body-worn camera. It's been around for 10 years, but the pricing's come down, the technology's better, the storage and security is better. So you're going to see that push, whether it be voluntary like we're doing or through statute, that you're going to have to have body-worn. Surveillance cameras, they're in public places now all over the place, and that's a real big benefit for law enforcement. So, and again, for the security side of it as well. Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If we have that agreement, we can access their cameras or at least get access to their server with them to look at footage and make recordings. So, and training is going to be the big one, Will. There's always going to be that push for better training, whether it be, force training, firearms, the other high liabilities, pursuit and driving, and again, de-escalation. But training in general, I think that's a horrible mistake, is if you're being pinched in your budget, is to first take it from training. It should never come from training.
I agree. I'm a big proponent of training. I mean, that's, I think, I mean, training should be like the number one thing as far as I'm concerned when it comes to your job. Because if you're not training to better yourself or your company, I mean, why you're there, right? You're just kind of floating. And so it just, I hate to see training suffer. And I know for the last year or so it has because of COVID. I mean, most of the community colleges weren't allowed to have people in, or if they could, it'd only be like half classes or whatever, and no hands-on or anything like that. Now it's starting to open back up, and hopefully it'll go back up.
We kind of got outside the box on that one. For our community policing classes, we ended up, and actually more like a verbal judo as well. We have plenty of instructors here. So the directive was, hey, build our own lesson plans and we'll do our own training, which we did.
Yeah.
We, internally we did in service for, basic intro to community policing and stuff like that. Just so, one, it's part of a career development so people can promote, but also, you know how it goes with the Justice Academy shutdown and community colleges. When they open back up, everybody's going to try and get in the same classes, and you're going to have this long wait. So we trimmed off that wait a little bit by doing some of our own training with instructors we have.
I know back at my old department, or that the county, is a lot of them are doing the online portion of it now. I think the colleges have gone to online, so that's helping some of it. But it took a year to get all that implemented. So going back to kind of the social worker and stuff like that, and you were talking about how police are going to still have to be there. Yeah, I mean, we're called first responders for a reason, because most of the time you're going to have an agitated subject. Police are going to have to go there. All right. Yeah. It's safe for the social worker to come in, because they're not just going to show up on scene without the police or somebody checking to make sure it's safe for them to go there. That
has not been our experience, where we have the ability to call for, a mobile crisis or some other resource external from the police department to come and help out with somebody who's, emotionally disturbed. Either they have a criteria when they come or don't come. So we're going anyway. So I think that will be interesting to see how it unfolds around the country, where they're diverting budget money to these other programs. I'm curious to see how it works out.
I know Wilmington has something they're just starting, and I think Fayetteville has had this program in for a while. They have civilian crash investigators.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So just a fender bender or whatever, anything that's, not a felony or high dollar value, they come in and they do the report. And I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of everyday police officers who are investigating. I know as a police department, you guys do recs. So it takes a lot of time to do some of those recs, So I remember you have a weather event, you might be tied up all day doing rec after rec after rec. I remember we had a snowstorm or ice storm, and I ended up at Walmart for like 6 hours doing nothing but little wrecks in the parking lot. I'm like, you got to be kidding me, man. There's something I could be doing better than this. So I think that stuff like that could help with the shortages, because obviously they're not going to be a trained police officer, so they're not going to be at the same level of pay and stuff like that, salary. So and then diverting some of the resource, or not the resources, but the calls to the crisis intervention team, stuff like that. So I think that's where it may head towards in the future.
We'll see. Yeah. It's about getting outside the box, right? And figuring out really what works for your department.
Yep.
Right. So Fayetteville, you brought up Fayetteville, Wilmington, they're much bigger than we are. So, they have maybe those resources and funding to take an old police car, retired police car, put yellow lights on the top, and train somebody to go work a not what I would call a non-reportable crash.
Yep.
B&B, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good idea.
I think a lot of them are either going to be retired police officers who are just, how most police officers are trying to hustle to get that overtime or extra duty, right? So, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully, something's figured out, because it is a very proud profession and it's a needed profession. And I hate to see what everyone's going through right now, on the outside looking in, because I know there's so many good men and women out there doing the job the right way. But any job, any career is going to have a few bad apples. Unfortunately, it seems like the a bad apple here, it gets exposed everywhere, where a bad apple somewhere else kind of gets pushed away. So
well, like I said, I feel like it'll turn around. We're in the valley. We'll come back up to the peak soon.
All right. Well, Nick, I appreciate you hopping on today. Is there anything else you want to talk about that I maybe missed, or anything you want to bring up?
I think we kind of covered a lot of what we discussed we would talk about. So I appreciate the time.
All right. I appreciate you hopping on next week. Hopefully Jake will be back. If not, Steve might be able to join us. We'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Take care, everybody.